Nick was an unfortunate loser who got dumped by his hot girlfriend and kicked out of his party on the same day. Now broke and useless, he teams up with a group of overpowered misfits to become the strongest party and get his revenge. After losing his perfect life, Nick became a J-pop fanboy and spent all his money buying his biases merch. However, he soon realized that his lifestyle was making him broke, so he returned to the Adventurers Guild so he could make some money. Unfortunately, he recalled how his former boss told him he was human garbage that would never make it as an adventurer, so the trauma made him too scared to approach anyone to form a party. At the end of the day, he went to drown his sorrows in a tavern, but this worsened his mood when he noticed the other adventurers celebrating their success. Just then, the waiter added 3 random adventurers to his table. One was a mage named Tiana, the other a priest named Zem, and last but not the least, a dragon named Curran. From their behavior, Nick figured they weren't friends, and that something was bugging each one of them. Deciding his problems were already enough for him, he took a big gulp of his drink and then slammed the cup down, declaring he'd never trust humans again. Coincidentally, his table mates did the same thing, so they began trauma bonding. Tiana told them that she was from the rich side of town and had been studying magic at a prestigious academy. Aside from being the top student, she was also engaged to the school's heartthrob, a noble named Alex. However, she caught him cheating on her with another chick, and to cover it up, he accused her of giving sloppy toppies to her teacher to boost her grades. Because of that, she got kicked out of school and was disowned by his family, so she got a room in town and tried to find work. Unfortunately, no one would hire a girl that only knew how to play with long sticks, so she turned to gambling and lost all her money. Frustrated, she came to the tavern to drink her sorrows away. When she finished her story, Zem took over, saying he'd also been betrayed, but not by his lover. It was by a young girl who used to help him gather medicinal herbs in the town. One night after dropping off some herbs, the girl wanted to taste his holy wand, and even though Zem turned her down politely, she was still pissed. The next day, while he was tending to patients, his fellow priest came with the girl, and she accused him of assaulting her. She also claimed he'd given her money to keep quiet about the whole thing, and everyone believed her. Zem was then locked up for 3 months, after which he was kicked out of the city. With nowhere to go, he went to an inn in the nearest town, and the owner welcomed him well. When Zem noticed that her back hurt, all he needed was one night with her to cure her back pain. The next morning, she advised to go to a big city and become an adventurer, and that's how he ended up there. Nick sympathized with him and then asked Curran to tell them her story. She hesitated for a few seconds before revealing that someone she trusted stole something important from her. Seeing as their stories were similar, they continued drinking together. The next morning, Nick woke up in the same room as his 3 drinking buddies and had a quick flashback of what had happened the previous night. Tiana then kicked everyone out since the room belonged to her. But before they could go far, Nick suddenly suggested that they form a party since they were all in the same boat. The trio were hesitant, but in the end, they agreed and went straight to the guild to register their party. Their impatience scared the young receptionist, so an older receptionist, Vilma, came to take over, and she immediately recognized Nick. As she went through their registration form, she commented on Curran and even addressed her as the survivor girl. Apparently, she had managed to come back alive alone from a C-rank labyrinth and earn the guild's respect. Despite her praise, Karen didn't look too happy, but Vilma told her to keep her head high because returning alive from a quest was the best ability an adventurer could have. She then asked what they wanted to name their party, and Nick said, Survivors. The others didn't have any problem with it, and Curran said it would show people that they meant business. The next day, they went to one of the 3 low-level labyrinths their G-rank party had access to. Nick explained that if they defeated the bosses of 2 of those labyrinths, they would be promoted to F rank. He also said they would use the labyrinths as training grounds to learn how to work together. Fortunately for Zem and Tiana, who lacked combat experience, the monsters in the labyrinth were all slimes. As they moved to the higher floors, Nick told them what to do, and they started calling him Sensei as a joke. Nick even started thinking to himself that they made the right choice banding together. When they arrived at a corridor, they continued collecting the slime cores, and Zem said he felt weird taking a living creature's life. Nick explained that if they didn't get rid of the monsters, their miasma would spread and affect normal plants and animals, as well as make the labyrinths grow bigger, which would be a hassle. Curious, Zem asked why monsters attacked people, and Tiana told him it was for the plot. As she kept explaining things, Nick warned them not to let their guard down since they were almost on the top floor. Tiana claimed everything was fine and even bragged that she'd taken down orcs and goblins before. The next moment, a slime spat in her face and she tripped over another one on the floor. Feeling embarrassed, she got back up and swore to exact revenge on the other slimes for the crimes of their comrades. Nick tried to talk her out of it, but Tiana didn't listen and unleashed a rain of icicles at the same time Curran stood up. Fortunately, the dragon girl used her sword to protect herself, However, instead of apologizing for her mistake, Tiana told Curran that she should have been more careful. Curran quickly cut Tiana off, saying she'd been trying to trust her, but thanks to the stunt she just pulled, they were back to square one. She also warned Tiana to be careful so she didn't accidentally get cut with her sword. Tiana got mad after hearing this and started acting like a victim, but Curran ignored the pampered princess. As they continued their quest, both girls ignored each other and also tried to outdo the other, which made Nick a little worried. When they got to the last floor, they encountered a giant slime, and Tiana decided it was her turn to steal the spotlight. Before anyone could stop her, she charged at the slime and hit it with her ice magic. The next moment, Nick screamed at her to move out of the way, but it was too late, and the slime exploded in their faces. Afterwards, they went to a river to clean up. When Tana started complaining, Nick told her it was her fault. If she had asked questions, he could have explained that large slimes react like time bombs when hit with magic. He then asked Zem why he'd moved to the front when he was supposed to be watching their six. Zem admitted it was because he didn't trust that they could handle the situation, and the girls were shocked. On the other hand, Nick had expected that response, so he announced that they would have a group meeting. To everyone's surprise, he took off his armor and revealed its strengths and weaknesses. He also told them what he could and couldn't do, prompting Zem to ask whether he was trying to gain their trust by being vulnerable. Nick admitted he was, but made it clear they didn't have to do the same because he knew what trusting others had done to them. Surprisingly, Zem decided to open up and told them that he was a walking target because he couldn't use attack magic, weapons, or even his fists. However, he was very good at healing and could help them in the long run. Following his lead, Tiana approached Curran and bowed deeply as she apologized for what had happened in the labyrinth. She also told her that her best elements were water and wind, which allowed her to control lighting like the almighty Zeus. As for her weaknesses, she was helpless against earth and fire magic and wouldn't survive a fistfight. Curran asked why she was telling her, and Tiana shrugged, claiming she just wanted to put it out there, even though she knew Curran used fire and was good with her fists. When she returned to her spot, she started shivering, so Curran spat a fireball in front of her and pretended that she'd been aiming for her but missed. Tiana understood it was her way of forgiving her, so they agreed to an unofficial truce. Later, Nick took them to the goblin forest for some real action and warned them not to let the goblins surround them. Because even though they were dumb, they worked well in packs. After they took down a few goblins, Nick removed the horns and said he would scout the area for more goblins. Tiana told him not to worry, and then used her magic to scan the forest in under a minute, which impressed them. As they were talking about the impossible things she'd done, she suddenly gasped in shock, then told them that she could sense powerful magic coming from one of the goblins nearby, and Nick said it was most likely because it was an ogre. Ogres were at least 5 times stronger than a group of goblins, and since they lacked experience as a group, he wasn't sure they could take it down. However, they couldn't leave it alone, as it could attack the nearby villages, so they came up with an attack plan. Tiana would distract it with magic, Nick and Curran would attack it while Zem would use his magic to give them a boost. When they found the pack, Curran charged ahead, and Nick followed closely behind. Tiana unleashed a rain of icicles on the goblins, but the ogre summoned more and told them not to be cocky. Nick and Curran continued attacking, and Tiana used her icicles to help them as much as she could. In the end, Curran went all Flame Hashira and sliced the ogre in half. She then turned excitedly to her friends, but Tiana told her she got lucky because of her assist. As they began removing the horns, Nick accidentally bumped into Curran, causing her to drop a necklace she'd been holding. Since it was a series of unfortunate events, the horn he'd been holding fell on the necklace and broke it. That necklace had been important to Curran because it was a memento from her past. That day, she'd been checking out jewelry at a stall when she spotted it and fell in love with it. Unfortunately, she couldn't afford to buy it, so she dropped it and turned to leave. However, before she could go far, the seller called out to her. He claimed she'd scratched the surface of the necklace with her claws, but Curran swore that she hadn't. The man told her to own up to her mistake and demanded that she pay for the necklace since he couldn't sell it anymore. When Curran didn't respond, he said he'd report her to the knights, so the girl became even more conflicted. Just as she was about to give in, her friend Kalios arrived and swiped the necklace away from the merchant. After examining it properly, he handed it to Curran and asked her to scratch it. The merchant protested, but Kalios told him to zip it and tossed a coin at the man. He then encouraged Curran to do as he asked, and after she did, he presented the necklace to the man. Not surprisingly, the scratch Curran left was much larger than the original scratch, so Kalios reached into the merchant's pocket and pulled out the real necklace, which he'd hidden. Since he'd been caught in his con, the man agreed to return the gold coin and let Curran keep the necklace. Curran was grateful to Kalios for helping her, and as they walked, she thought to herself that she had made the right decision to serve him. It turned out that the dragon race was destined to serve the hero, and Curran was sure that Kalios was the one. The next day, he found her while she was packing to tell her they were ready to head to the labyrinth. When he noticed her sack, he told her not to bring it as it would only slow them down, so Curran listened. In the labyrinth, she easily cut down a beetle monster, and her party members began glazing her, which inflated her ego. As they continued exploring, they came to the boss's room, and Kalios explained that the snake hid inside a large pot. Magic wouldn't affect it as long as it stayed there, so they needed to lure it out. Since Curran was their muscle, the task fell to her, so she charged at the pot and slammed into it. Annoyed by the disturbance, the snake revealed itself and tried attacking her, but Curran jumped back. Kalios and the others then rushed to assist her using magic, and Curran felt grateful. Suddenly, the snake began glowing and grew more aggressive, throwing Curran off her game. She called out to Kalios and the others to help, but they did nothing, and she got sprayed by its poison. It wasn't until she collapsed to the ground that Kalios showed his traitorous face and revealed that they had used her as bait. Curran couldn't believe her ears or her eyes, but because of the poison, she couldn't move. Long after they left her for dead, Curran staggered out of the labyrinth and began walking to town. She wanted to retrieve the Dragon King's jewel that had been entrusted to her before she left home, so she kept going. When she got back to town, she collapsed in front of the inn as the rain came down heavily. Everyone was surprised to see her because Kalios had told them that she had died, and that's when she realized something was off. She immediately ran upstairs to look for her things, but they were gone, and so was Kalios. Enraged, she pulled off her necklace and tried to throw it away, but for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to do it. In the days that followed, she went around town looking for Kalios and the others, but they were gone without a trace. One day, while she was out searching, a man caught her attention. As she stared at him like an awestruck fool, she heard two guys talking about him. They said he was Fifths, the solo eater, and Curran became even more intrigued. After watching him eat for a while, she walked into the restaurant and ordered the same dish that he did. It turned out that Fifths had gotten his title because he was a one-person adventuring party. The man's aura drew her to him, so she began following him everywhere and doing the things he did. She tried her best to be as stealthy as a ninja, but Fifths was a smart man, and he'd noticed her a long time ago. He'd purposely say things out loud because he knew she was listening and would copy him. One day, while they were eating at a restaurant, a drunk guy knocked his sword over, but Curran used her tail to catch it. Fifths thanked her, saying the sword was his life, and as he tried to leave, she called out to him and bowed in gratitude. He didn't try to ask why she'd done that and left after telling her which meal she should order next. That was the last time she ever saw him, but Curran never stopped visiting restaurants or eating the food he'd introduced her to. Unfortunately, having a gourmet hobby was very expensive, and in no time, Curran was broke, which was why she visited the guild that day and met Nick and the others. Back in the present, Nick visited a jewelry shop to see if he could replace Curran's necklace. Sadly, he couldn't find a replica and began wondering why she hadn't gotten mad at him for breaking the necklace in the first place. Just then, Agate, his favorite idol, happened to pass by, and since they knew each other before she became a global sensation, she offered to listen to his plight. After he told her, Agate said it was selfish of him to try to replace the necklace, which obviously meant something to Curran. She then advised him to speak to Curran to find out how she felt about the whole thing, rather than assuming. Realizing that she was right, Nick went looking for Curran and found her buying snacks at the marketplace. When he approached her, she offered him a taste, and Nick almost lost his taste buds to the spices. Curran laughed at his reaction and teased him, calling him weak. A little while later, they stood on a bridge, and Nick tried to ask about the necklace without actually asking. When Curran realized what he was doing, she assured him that she wasn't pissed and that she was better off without the necklace. That night, the survivors' party ran into each other at the tavern, and while Curran was showing them a magic trick, the younger guild receptionist came to find them. They were then taken to Vilma, who gave them a quest to search the labyrinth of bonds for a sacred sword. She promised to compensate them whether or not they found the sword, so Nick demanded a map and a list of all the monsters in the labyrinth. Later, as they explored the place, they noticed that the labyrinth had a modern aesthetic. Tiana pointed out that all the monsters they had encountered so far were artificial, and they began to wonder if they had been isekai'd. Unknown to them, they were being watched through a camera, and whoever was on the other side said he couldn't wait to see what they were made of. Soon, they reached a corridor with green lights, and Nick decided to explore it. The others thought it was a waste of time since it was a dead end, but Nick was sure they would find something. When he walked towards the light, a secret door opened up in the wall, and Bro almost jumped out of his skin. The others were equally shocked, but despite this, they all walked into the secret room. The place was dark, with display cases everywhere, but Nick told them that what they were looking for was in the middle of the room. Tiana quickly scanned the room for magic and became suspicious when she couldn't sense anything. When they reached the middle of the room, the lights came on, and a voice congratulated them for making it that far. To their surprise, the voice belonged to the sword, and as the group stared at it, they wondered if they were being played. The The sword had no blade, and it made them doubt whether they were in the right place. The sword assured them that it was what they were searching for, revealing that it was an angel-class psychic weapon with the code name, Sword of Bonds. Its words just confused them, so Nick tried to grab it and stash it away, but the sword protested. It tried to convince one of them to equip it, but they refused, explaining they were going to sell it off. Hearing this, the sword became annoyed and complained about how the guild had tricked it. They had sealed it away in the labyrinth after assuring it that someone worthy would come along and find it. Unfortunately, no one ever came, and it had been rusting away for years. Nick sympathized but said they had bills to pay, and as soon as he picked it up, the labyrinth's defense system activated. The sword tried to warn them, but before it could, something burst into the room. Once the dust cleared up, the group found themselves standing before a nanobotic golem. Tiana immediately attacked it with her icicles, and Curran charged at it to cut it down. However, before she could reach it, the golem pushed the icicles out of its body, and they went flying towards Curran. She quickly raised her sword to defend herself, but one of the icicles hit her stomach and knocked the wind out of her. Zem and Tiana crowded around her as Nick charged at the monster to try to stop it. Unfortunately, his knife and skills were useless against his opponent, so he called out to his friends and told them to leave. He was prepared to use himself to buy them time, so the sword suggested that he equip him. Nick agreed, and the moment the blade appeared, he felt like Luke Skywalker. On the other side, his friends were trying and failing to open the door, so the sword told him to envision Curran and say Union. Nick did as the sword asked, but then became confused when nothing happened. The sword was also confused, since Nick met all the criteria, but since they were about to get Hulk smashed, Nick didn't ask questions. He rolled out of the way quickly and sliced one of the golem's arms off, but the arm turned into a minion and grabbed his leg. This allowed the golem to slap him aside and down the hole it had created to get into the room. It then turned its attention to Tiana and the others, so Tiana turned it into a popsicle. However, she knew that her ice couldn't hold it for long, so she instructed Curran to look for Nick. Curran rushed to the hole, and shortly after she disappeared into it, the golem broke free and went after Tiana and Zem. The duo had no other choice but to work together to keep it contained until Curran and Nick returned. Speaking of Nick, he had landed on some rubble and discovered that he'd broken a few ribs. Just as he was about to start digging his way out, Curran arrived to help him. Instead of thanking her, he told her to return to take their friends and run because they all couldn't afford to die. Curran told him not to pull the sacrificial lamb act with her and swore they would all leave the place alive. Her tone left no room for arguments, so Nick apologized and began digging from his own end. He also apologized for breaking her necklace, and Curran reminded him that she was over it. Nick argued that it was important to her, and Curran admitted that it had been at some point. However, she had only held on to it because she was a delusional idiot who hoped that Kalios would return and things would go back to the way they were before he showed her why men were scum. Her fixation on the past had prevented her from moving forward, but on the day the necklace broke, her invincible chains broke along with it. So she reaffirmed to Nick that she was better off without the necklace. After she helped him out, the sword asked him to try saying Union again, convinced it would work this time. Back up top, Tiana had reached her limit, so she asked Zem to save his remaining energy to treat Curran and Nick. Zem insisted that she shouldn't give up, but she calmly pointed out that there was nothing else she could do. Zem then decided to stay with her, and just as they were about to meet their end, the golem exploded. When they looked up, they saw a fused Nick and Curran smiling down at them. Before they could ask questions, the sword instructed Nick and Curran to get rid of the golem's core so it would stop regenerating. The Walmart Gotenks immediately powered up and charged at the golem, sword raised. One slash later, and the tech golem was history, so Nick and Curran returned to normal. Hours later, they returned to the guild and presented the sword to Vilma. However, after taking a look at it, she said the sword wasn't as powerful as they had been led to believe. Nick told her that it wasn't their problem and asked for their payment, which she promised to give after they introduced their new friend to her. The boy said his name was Kizuna and that he was the new member of their party. After they left the guild, they breathed a sigh of relief that Vilma hadn't realized that they had given her the wrong sword. It turned out that Kizuna was actually the sacred sword, having transformed into a human. When they arrived at Tiana's room later, Nick divided the money among them, and even Kizuna got a cut. After that, they all left to do their own thing, but Tiana invited Kizuna to the racetracks with her because she knew he was bored. Later that week, the survivors' party went to an icy labyrinth, and Kizuna used his telepathy to link their minds so that their voices wouldn't attract their prey. Curran told them she liked being in their heads, and before they realized what was happening, she went to stand next to the ogre to test the telepathic range. Tiana screamed at the stupid girl to return, but Kizuna suddenly charged at the monster, saying he was going to prove his strength. His voice alerted the monster to him, so it tried to turn him into a pancake with its club, but Kizuna blocked it and pushed it back. Enraged, the ogre tried to crush him with ice, But once again, Kizuna flexed his abilities and slapped the ice ball out of the way. He then teleported in front of the monster and split himself into two, surprising everyone. After he cut the monster down, his friends gathered around him, and Nick told them he was suddenly feeling weak. Kizuna said it was because he was borrowing his magic and stamina, but Nick decided not to argue. Instead, he commended his sword skills, and Kizuna bragged that he'd absorbed the skills of the swordsman who used him in the past. This prompted Tiana to call him a cheat, but Kizuna argued that he'd done nothing wrong. Nick quickly cut in before things escalated and told Kizuna that he was glad to have him on the team. However, he made it clear that they wouldn't use Union again, which made Kizuna complain. Nick reminded him that they had passed out after using it once, so he didn't want to risk that happening in a serious battle. Kizuna understood his reason, but still pouted because he felt like it. Zem and Tiana then told him through the link that they were glad to have him in the team, while Curran used it to announce that she was hungry. Nick then said they should go out to eat, but Tiana and Zem said they had other things to do. Curran kept insisting that she wanted to eat, so Kizuna screamed at them to stop using the link for ideal chit-chat. Eventually, they left the labyrinth, and Kizuna went with Nick and Curran to a restaurant. While they were waiting for their food, Nick suddenly spotted his ex-girlfriend Claudine and her new boyfriend there. The boy had just given her a birthday gift, and after she thanked him, she told him that she needed some money to go home. According to her, her mother was seriously ill, and she was worried that she would die. As she began fake crying, Nick made his presence known, catching her off guard. She immediately demanded to know what he wanted, but Nick pretended not to hear her and asked how many birthdays she had. It turned out that she'd broken up with him on her supposed birthday weeks ago, and that was when he learned she was a con artist. Realizing that Nick was about to expose her scam, Claudine tried to leave with her boyfriend, but Nick threatened to report her for fraud. After weighing her options, she decided that she valued her freedom more and threw the gift box at Nick before storming off, leaving her boyfriend stunned. The next day, Nick and the others were discussing their next quest when Claudine suddenly poured beer on him. Curran immediately took a defensive position, but she didn't attack and let Nick talk to his evil ex. She came with her friend Leon, and the guy told Nick he'd heard what he'd done to Claudine. Nick knew they were partners in fraud, so he told Leon that Claudine had planned to ditch him, but Claudine swore that Nick was making up stories. Leon believed her and demanded that Nick follow him outside so they could settle things like men, and Nick agreed. However, when they got to the alley beside the guild, Leon suddenly apologized for challenging him. He said he'd been looking for a way to kick Claudine out of his group because she had become dead weight. Nick didn't understand where Leon was going with his talk until he asked when he planned to ditch his crew. Nick started laughing, and Leon, believing they were on the same page, joined in. However, when he tried telling Nick his game plan, Nick punched him and apologized, saying his fist had slipped. Annoyed, Leon pulled out his blade and tried to cut Nick, but Nick managed to maneuver him, and he was lying on the ground in seconds. He then twisted Leon's arm and started giving him a speech on how earning money legally was more fulfilling than being a thief. Just as it seemed like Leon was seeing the light, someone knocked Nick off him with a wind spell. It was the third member of Leon's party, and Nick told them that they were cowards for teaming up against him. The bespectacled idiot tried to belittle him, but Curran suddenly knocked him down and picked him up with her tail. Behind her were the rest of their party, the guild receptionist and Vilma. She asked Curran to let the low-budget Harry Potter go, and when she did, the wimp ran to hide behind Leon. Surprisingly, the old woman hadn't come there to stop the fight, but to remind them to follow the rules. As soon as she said this, Leon challenged Nick to an arithmetic bare knuckle, which was something he and his party had never heard about. Later, after they all settled inside the guild, the old woman explained that the arithmetic bare knuckle was a one-on-one bout of mathematics and brawling held simultaneously. It had 10 rounds in total, and the team that got the highest score for each math quiz got a free turn to punch their opponent. When she finished explaining, she asked them to pick lots to decide who would take the math quiz. As the plot gods would have it, Curran was the lucky candidate for her party, and she started freaking out. Nick managed to calm her down, but Claudine kept making side comments, which pissed her off. Later, Zem tested Curran's arithmetic knowledge and discovered that on a scale of 1 to 10, Nick was cooked. Curran felt sad looking at her test scores, but surprisingly, Zem told her that she did well. According to him, she'd given them insight into her brain's limited capabilities, so they knew where to focus when teaching her. Curran didn't think someone as dumb as her was teachable, but Zem told her to take inspiration from Goku. After that, they began tutoring her every day, but Zem often slipped away to spend time in the red light district. However, it was soon revealed that he didn't just go there to crack and get crack, but also to fish for information about the Iron Tiger party. The girls happily spilt all the tea he wanted to know, and it became clear that Claudine and her friends were going to cheat. At the end of the week, the survivors' party members gathered in Nick's room for a strategy meeting. He told them that Claudine's group was plotting something, and Zem added that they had intentionally baited them into taking the challenge. Curran asked how he knew, so Nick explained that he had Zem dig up some dirt on their opponents. Zem then shared what he'd learned, and Tiana concluded that Claudine's group would use thought gems to create a telepathic link and cheat on the quiz. The next day, everyone gathered on the guild's rooftop for the arithmetic bare-knuckle match. When the first questions were given to the girls, Curran became happy, as they were part of the equations she studied. Seeing her excitement, Claudine made a snide remark about kindergartners solving the problem with their eyes closed. Curran told her to shut up and then began working on the questions because she didn't want to let Nick down. Speaking of Nick, he was on the wrestling mat trying to channel his inner Baki, but Leon wasn't interested in fighting him. When Nick realized what he was doing, he figured the Tigerman was trying to buy time, but he had already anticipated that. Leon also noticed the moment Nick figured out what he was doing, but it didn't bother him because he was sure that Nick wouldn't figure out the rest of his plan. The next moment, Curran announced that she had completed the quiz, so the receptionist rang the bell to stop the round. After grading the quizzes, the scores were announced, and unfortunately, Curran scored 12 points less than Claudine. As a result, Leon earned a penalty punch, and he used it well. Nick commended him for a punch well served, and that's when he figured out that the second part of Leon's plan was to abuse the penalties. They knew Curran was as dumb as a bird, so as long as Claudine kept acting the quizzes, Nick wouldn't stand a chance. A little while later, the second quiz scores were announced, and Curran's score dropped by 10 points. After Leon hit Nick, the Dragon Girl started apologizing to him and blaming her slow thinking for his plight. Nick assured her that he was fine as he'd come prepared to take a lot of punches. He also told her to stop focusing on him and focus on the questions, so she promised to do just that. Seeing this, Claudine told Curran not to delude herself into thinking that she could win, and Curran told her to mind her business. As the third round commenced, Curran threw herself into answering questions, and Leon continued evading Nick's punches. Those watching grew annoyed and called Leon out for being a coward, but he didn't care, since it was all part of his plan to exhaust Nick. Meanwhile, Tiana was busy scanning the area for traces of magic but couldn't find any. This left her perplexed, and she began to wonder whether they had been wrong about Claudine using thought gems. Soon, the third round was over, and once again, Nick got punched by Leon, and the people started complaining. Just as their voices grew louder, Tiana hit her pipe against the box to gain everyone's attention. Once she had it, she suggested to Vilma that she give the remaining quizzes to Claudine and Curran to solve at once. Vilma pointed out that Nick would receive all the penalty punches at once if Curran failed, and Nick assured her that he didn't mind. Leon remained silent, but he couldn't help but wonder what Tiana was actually smoking because her suggestion put Nick at a disadvantage. However, he soon realized that they were trying to sabotage their plan and concluded that they were fools. The next moment, the receptionist gave the signal to commence the fourth round, and Curran started answering her questions at the speed of light. Claudine was taken aback for a few seconds, but she convinced herself that Curran was only pretending to know the answers. She then spoke to Beg in her head, reading out the questions for him, and he responded almost immediately. As soon as she started writing down the answers, Tiana looked around and located Beg in the clock tower. She quickly alerted Zem and Kizuna, and when Nick saw them leave, he decided to mess with Leon by asking where Beg was. Leon hesitated but answered that Beg wasn't interested in fights, so he didn't come. When Nick didn't ask follow-up questions, Leon looked around and noticed that Tiana was missing. Immediately, he realized that their plan had been compromised, so he tried to warn Claudine, but she snapped at him. She was already pissed off that Beg was taking so long to respond, and the thought that Nick could win pissed her off even more. Beg asked her to be patient since he'd gotten the questions mixed up, and as he began solving the right one, Kizuna pointed out his mistake. Initially, he thanked him, but then panicked when he realized that he'd been discovered. Back at the guild, Claudine kept calling out to Beg, but when he didn't respond, she lost it and screamed, shocking everyone. A few moments later, Tiana and the others returned with Beg, and he apologized for getting caught. Tiana then waved his thought gem like a flag, making it clear that Claudine had been cheating, so Vilma ordered that the entire group be arrested. As they were being taken away, Claudine began complaining, insisting she wasn't a bad person. Leon told her to accept her fate, but she refused, so Tiana spoke up. She told Curran that nobody was born bad, but certain situations led people down the wrong path. Tiana then advised her to try correcting her mistakes while she was in jail. Days later, Leon sat in his cell reminiscing about his past with his older brother. They had been in the same group before, but most of their friends lost their lives in a deadly labyrinth. The ones who survived conquered the labyrinth and took all the treasure it had. Leon's brother used his share of the loot to attain fame and more fortune. However, he died a pitiful death, and Leon vowed never to trust anyone again. Back in the present, a knight approached Leon in his cell, and with his sword piercing Leon's skin, he demanded to know what happened to a particular sword he had taken from the labyrinth. Apparently, it never showed up on the black market, so he was sure he stashed it somewhere. In response, Leon summoned the sword, which turned out to be the Sword of Evolution, to do the talking for him. Meanwhile, Tiana went to the casino to blow off some steam, but Nick and Kizuna tagged along. Not because they wanted to gamble, but because Kizuna heard the casino was selling special ice cream and wanted to taste it. Unfortunately, the ice cream sold out before it reached Kizuna's turn, and the boy was unhappy. Hoping to cheer him up, Nick asked if he wanted to play some games, but Kizuna said he couldn't because an ethical code had been installed in him. Just then, they stumbled upon a blackjack table, and Kizuna noticed that the cards had anti-magic paint on them. The dealer told him it was a measure to prevent cheating, and Kizuna said they must have paid big bucks to coat all the cards in the paint. Meanwhile, at Tiana's table, she was in the process of making her fellow players broke, and that put them on edge. When she won the next round, one of the guys started complaining, and she told him to speak to her again when he learned the basics of gambling. Realizing that she just insulted him, the guy stormed off, and his girlfriend, Belle, who had been doing the mannequin challenge beside him, thanked Tiana. She had been trying to get the guy to quit, but he refused, so she was convinced that Tiana's words would do the trick. Tiana said she was only telling him the truth and advised Belle to dump the worthless bum. Belle said it wasn't something she could do easily, and Tiana told her that knowing when to give up was a gambler's best trait. Belle bowed her head to thank Tiana again, but just as Tiana tried to walk away, a monster barged into the place, prompting people to run for their lives. Surprisingly, the monster was Leon, and he was there to find Nick. It turned out that after the sword freed him, he asked it to help him get revenge on Nick. The sword was similar to Kizuna, so it agreed to help Leon, and all Leon had to do to transform was say evolution. Back in the casino, Leon found Tiana and demanded to know where Nick was. Initially, she had no idea that she was speaking to Leon, but when she realized it, she asked how he got hold of Bane's super steroid. Leon ignored her question and demanded to know where Nick was again, so Tiana said she wasn't going to tell him. This obviously pissed him off, so he said he'd like to see whose life was more valuable, hers or Nick's. Tiana tried to answer, but he cut her off and warned her to be careful with what she was going to say, because his heightened sense of smell could detect lies. Tiana weighed her options because lying could get her squashed like a bug, so she decided to play with his mind. She asked why he assumed that Nick would care if she got hurt, and Leon told her it was because she was Nick's comrade. This made Tiana laugh, as she explained that her relationship with her party members was born out of necessity. When she finally stopped, she lit her pipe and then used the igniter to attack Leon. As soon as he fell, she grabbed Belle and tried to run to the exit, but Leon recovered quickly and threw one of the tables in their path. Tiana managed to jump out of the way, but Belle passed out from shock. When Leon began approaching them, Tiana spotted Belle's boyfriend hiding nearby, so she screamed at him to protect Belle. Her voice snapped him back to his senses, so he rushed and pulled her out of the way. Tiana then returned her attention to Leon, telling him that he had the wrong idea about her party members. When she mentioned that they would never help each other if it meant risking their lives, Leon thought she was capping, but after he sniffed the air, he realized that she was telling the truth. However, he could also tell that she was secretly hoping what she'd said was wrong, which made him see her as pathetic. Tiana reaffirmed that Nick wouldn't come for her, so Leon decided to get rid of her. Just as he was about to cut her down, Nick showed up and blocked the attack using Kizuna. Tiana was surprised to see him, but he told her not to mistake him for her knight in shining armor. Turning back to Leon, he pretended not to know who he was, which pissed the guy off even more, so he tried to cut him. However, the sword told him to stop as it had sensed one of its kind. At that moment, Kizuna acknowledged the Sword of Evolution's presence, but the sword wasn't happy to see him. Hoping to get rid of him, it transferred more power to Leon, causing him to grow bigger and angrier than before. Seeing this, Tiana suggested to Nick that they use Union, and Nick agreed. After they transformed, they tried to trap Leon using ice, but Leon broke free and started rampaging around the casino. Well, his body rampaged, while his mind fought to regain control. The sword told him not to fight him, as it was only fulfilling his wish to become powerful. Leon said he never wanted to become an uncontrollable monster, but the sword assured him that he was in denial. When Nick and Tiana trapped them in ice again, the sword told Leon that he had been able to take him from the labyrinth because his heart was already tainted. Leon argued that he only took the sword because he wanted to be like his brother, whom everyone looked up to. In response, the sword reminded him that his brother was 6 feet under, unalived by the very people he called friends, which was why Leon had vowed never to trust humans again and had been taking advantage of the few idiots he came across. As Leon continued to deny his role in his self-destruction, a brief flashback of his early days with his brother came to his mind, so he screamed for help, and help arrived in the form of Nick and Tiana, who used the anti-magic cards on him. Immediately, he changed back, and when the sword fell, Nick and Tiana sealed it in ice. After they left, the knights arrived and took Leon back to prison. While he was reflecting on his actions, Nick approached him and said he could rest easy because his rampage hadn't resulted in casualties. Days later, while Nick was out exercising, Agate joined him and began acting like his conscience. Surprisingly, the stupid idiot believed it until he turned around and saw her behind him. After overcoming his shock, they sat together on a bench, and Agate asked Nick curiously if he had a goal. Nick told her that he did, which made her say she could finally let go of her guilt. Confused, he asked what she was talking about, and she explained that, after handing him the ticket, she had wondered whether she should have done so. On the one hand, she felt she was giving him a temporary solution to his problem. On the other, she felt she was leading him down a destructive path. Nick admitted that if he hadn't met her that day, he might have turned to a life of crime, so he was actually grateful to her. Agate told him that she was happy to have made a positive impact on his life, but Nick couldn't help but feel something was wrong with her. She canceled all her concerts and had stopped making public appearances, which made her visit even more surprising. The truth was that Agate was actually Belle, and before she became an idol, she used to sing at her boyfriend Donnie's restaurant. One night, a scout dropped by and offered her a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Belle had been hesitant, but when Donnie found out, he immediately accepted the offer without a second thought. Out of curiosity, Belle visited a concert with the other girls who had been scouted, and that was when she discovered the beauty of being an idol. After that day, she stopped rejecting the idea of becoming an idol and embraced it wholeheartedly. She'd been so excited to share her new life with Donnie, but things weren't the same. He got into gambling and started asking her for money every time he saw her, completely ignoring her personal needs. It made her feel neglected, unlike when he first opened his restaurant. Back then, he promised her that they would rise to the top together, but ever since she became an idol, he just saw her as a personal cash machine. One day, while she was in a restaurant reflecting on her so-called relationship, she witnessed Claudine breaking up with Nick and felt bad for the poor guy. When he left the restaurant, she followed him until he stopped at a fountain, where she gave him the ticket and kicks off his idol obsession. Weeks later, Donnie invited her to go to the casino with him, claiming that if she watched him in action, her mind would be put at ease. Belle agreed out of curiosity, and that was how she met Tiana. That day, while Tiana was on her winning spree, Belle felt that she was trying to teach her a lesson, which was why she stayed to talk to her. When the mysterious blonde knight appeared and took Leon down, Belle felt it was a sign from the heavens that she needed to start afresh. So, days after the incident, she took on all of Donnie's debts, but ended her relationship with him. Donnie tried to plead with her not to leave him, but her agent told him to know his place and warned him never to speak to her again. Seeing as things were about to escalate, Belle stepped in and asked the agent to let her handle things her way. She then turned to Donnie and explained that she ended things with him because he had stopped seeing her as his partner. She told him that she was tired of being treated like an afterthought and wanted to focus on herself. Surprisingly, Donnie started laughing and told her that a true gambler knew that the moment they gave up, their prize would belong to someone else. Her agent told him not to be delusional, but Donnie was convinced that she was making a mistake. When he began walking away, Belle called out to him and gave him the card she'd picked up at the casino and told him it would protect him. She truly believed that the woman who defeated Leon was a goddess. Donnie snatched the card from her hand even though he thought she was talking nonsense. And after that day, she only saw him once, but she didn't speak to him and kept going. Later that week, she held a comeback concert, and Nick was there to cheer for her as usual. Before the concert kicked off, Belle addressed the crowd and told them that her new song was dedicated to the blonde goddess who saved her and everyone else. Nick was shocked by everything she said, but when she began singing, he forgot all about his shock and enjoyed himself. Meanwhile, Belle told herself that she wanted to become the type of idol who inspired people to do better and fight for what's right. The day after the concert, Nick met Belle again, but she didn't show him her face. She hid behind a bush and tried making jokes, but Nick asked if she was doing okay. He said he'd noticed something was troubling her the last time they met, and Belle told him not to worry about it. Nick decided not to pry and told her that the most important thing was that she was trying to fix the problem. Later that day, while Kizuna was trying to convince his party members that the stepping man monster he read about in the magazine was real, a girl who introduced herself as Olivia suddenly showed up at their hangout. She said she was an adventurer and a writer, and coincidentally, she was the one who wrote the piece on the stepping man. Kizuna instantly became excited and told her that he was her biggest fan, but Nick called cap. Zem defended Kizuna, saying it wasn't his fault that he had an overly active imagination. When Olivia heard him mention Kizuna's name, she became intrigued, but claimed it was because his name was unique. Tiana then asked what it was like being an adventurer and a writer, so Olivia bounced into the room like a gymnast and tried to explain. However, she missed her step and fell on Curran, who righted her. She then excused herself, but told the group that they would find her snooping around wherever something weird was happening in the city. That night, Zem was on his way home after getting wasted when an invisible person swiped the young girl in front of him off the street. Meanwhile, Nick and Kizuna had just left Agate's concert, and Kizuna sensed that Zem was in danger. When they found Zem, the invincible man was trying to take the young girl away from him. Because of his appearance, Nick immediately assumed the invincible man was the stepping man, but Kizuna called him a cheap imitation. Annoyed, he charged at the so-called stepping man and threw his sword at him, but it passed through the guy. Refusing to give up, Kizuna used parallel and split himself into 5, but the stepping man leapt into the air and attacked him with a chain. Kizuna was forced to go down, and the guy escaped into the night. Later, they went with Zem to the playhouse he frequented, and Reina, the girl they saved, confirmed that her attacker was the stepping man. She explained that her mother had gotten hurt while trying to catch him because she believed he was responsible for all the kidnappings that had been going on lately. Unfortunately, no one believed her mother, and they might not believe her either. Zem assured her that he and his friends believed her because they had witnessed him in action. As he was commending her for being brave, Reina suddenly told him that she wanted to become his student because he'd been so cool when he saved her. When she tried to go to him, Nick blocked her path, and Zem told Reina that she was 15 years too early to be his student. He didn't offer any further explanation, but Reina seemed okay with it and asked how she would train until she was old enough. Zem told her that they would discuss that later and asked her to spend the night with Red, the owner of the place. Reina happily agreed, and when she tried to hug Zem, Nick and Red blocked her path again. Zem then told her that she wasn't allowed to come near him for 15 years. The next day, they went to the Bounty Hunters Guild to look for clues about the stepping man. The receptionist didn't want to tell them anything since they weren't high-ranking adventurers, so they agreed to catch someone in exchange for the info. The girl gave them a bounty request for a guy named Hale, and just as they agreed to look for the guy, one of the hunters in the room started complaining. He said they were butting into things that didn't concern them, and Tiana told him that he was nothing but a jealous hater, which pissed him off. He immediately clapped back, but Tiana refused to back down and told him that she and her friends would return with Hale. Captain Eyepatch obviously didn't think they were capable, so he proposed that they make a bet. To his surprise, Tiana slammed a large sack of coins on the table and told him that she would give it all to him if her crew failed to find and capture Hale. The guy immediately tried to back out, but she told him not to be a chicken and have her money ready by the time she returned. After that, she and her friends went to the slums because the info they had said that Hale would be there. Upon entering, they were approached by the gatekeeper, who warned them not to disturb a guy named Nalgava. As they went deeper into the place, they encountered some wannabe thugs who tried to intimidate them. However, Nick, Tiana, and Kizuna put the fear of God into them, and their leader sang like a canary when Nick asked where Hale was. When they eventually found Hale, he tried to escape through the window, but Kizuna was there to stop him. As they bundled him out, Nalgava approached them and demanded to know where they were taking Hale. He said Hale was one of his patients, and he was in the middle of treating him. Nick explained that Hale had a bounty on his head, so Nalgava agreed to let them take him as long as they allowed him to administer his final medication. Apparently, Hale was suffering from the yellow demon sickness, and if he weren't treated, he would die. Nick pointed out that Hale would die anyway, since his crimes were many, but Zem explained that it was a healer's duty to treat their patients to the end. The way Zem spoke made Nalgava realize that he was a former priest just like him. Before they could begin discussing things only they understood, Kizuna asked Nalgava if he knew anything about the stepping man. Nalgava said he didn't, but Hale started laughing and mocking Kizuna for believing in a fairy tale. His reaction led Nalgava to believe he knew something, so Nalgava asked him to tell the group everything he knew. Hale's smile disappeared from his face, and he told them about the sus reporter going around giving candy to underdeveloped humans. A little while later, they returned to the guild, and Tiana made sure to collect the money from the guy she had made a bet with. Surprisingly, she didn't keep the money and used it to buy drinks for all the bounty hunters. The next day, when they returned to the guild, the receptionist gave them the money from Hale's bounty and also all the information they had on the stepping man. As they went through the reports, they realized that none of them had any valuable information. The receptionist told them that they wouldn't find anything useful since the stepping man was a myth. Nick explained that they weren't interested in the myth but in the one who was going around kidnapping young people. The receptionist said the only suspicious person she knew was Olivia, who so happened to be there at that moment, talking to Reina. Nick and the others didn't want to believe that Olivia was behind the kidnappings, but after comparing notes, Nick decided to approach her. He ordered Tiana and Curran to guard the exits, then went to interrogate Olivia about where she was 2 nights ago. Olivia said a whole bunch of nonsense, and when he accused her of being the stepping man, she suddenly kicked the table and escaped through the roof, shocking everyone. Later, the group went to Red's place, and while they were discussing the plot twist involving Olivia, Reina's mother, Ada, arrived. Nick immediately recognized her as the former swashbuckler of the A-rank party Grand Chef, and the woman was surprised that her reputation preceded her. She then apologized for the trouble her daughter had caused them, but Zem assured her it was fine, after which he instructed Reina to stop digging into the stepping man business. Reina tried to protest, but because she had referred to Zem as master, her mother became confused and asked what she meant. Reina explained that she wanted to become Zem's student, but before she could say more, Zem cut her off. He then told her that she was his enemy, which made no sense to her, so he explained what had happened to him in the past. Thanks to that incident, he couldn't speak or be around young girls anymore, as he'd start having panic attacks. Reina pointed out that he'd saved her from the stepping man, and Zem said it was because the situation was too dire for him to leave her alone. However, he admitted that the incident had made him realize that he could overcome his condition one day. Eventually, they returned to discussing the stepping man issue, and Ada advised them to give up because they weren't strong enough to defeat him. Nick assured her that they were aware of that, but said they couldn't sit back and do nothing while innocent people were going missing. When he mentioned that he disliked the fact that the culprit was using the stepping man's legend to commit crimes, Ada admitted she was the one who spread the rumor. She had hoped it would intrigue the adventurers and bounty hunters enough to try to catch the kidnapper, since the knights had their hands full. Unfortunately, it hadn't worked well, and her daughter got caught up in the mess, so she was pulling out. Nick said he understood her worry, but pleaded with her to at least teach them one or two things so they could win against the stepping man. Moved by his sincere request, Ada agreed to help, and the first thing she did was make mushroom soup for them. The crew was confused about how soup would help them, so Ada explained that the mushrooms would draw out their latent magical potential. After they drank it, she talked about the stepping man's techniques, which involved a lot of jumping, melee attacks, and dodging. She said the way they used their magic would determine their victory, and after they drank it, she handed Curran an igniter, then told her to hold tightly and say the word burn until flames came out. Curran tried, but she couldn't get the thing to light up because she had a hard time concentrating. Nick was given the igniter next and managed to get a flame going, but said that such a small flame wouldn't do them any good. Ada took the igniter back and told him that she wasn't asking them to use fire magic. She then showed off a little and told him that their training would determine the outcome of the fight. The next day, she made Nick jump on a rope because he needed to learn the light body enhancement spell that the stepping man used. Nick managed to jump 8 times, but when he tried the 9th time, he fell on his face. That night, another stepping man attempted to kidnap another young girl, but Kizuna drop-kicked him out of the sky. Once the girl was safely in Curran's arms, Nick, Zem, and Kizuna surrounded him and demanded to know if he was Olivia. Of course, they got no response, and he managed to escape before they could stop him. Kizuna then told his friends that the stepping man was using 3 different types of magic. Nick pointed out that doing so would put a strain on him, so that he might have been using a magical item. Since they knew nothing about magical items, Nick went to visit Leon in jail the next day to consult with him. Leon told him that the person was using something called the Illusion King's Jewel or something similar. The only way to break the illusion was to speak the user's name, making Nick realize that the person they encountered wasn't Olivia since he'd said her name. Days later, Nick perfected the light body technique, and just as he finished training, Tiana arrived with Zem. They told him they had investigated the reports of the broken roof and that all of them led to the slums. This convinced them that the stepping man operated there, so they went to speak to the gatekeeper. The man told them that someone had dropped off a body in the common graveyard, but he couldn't remember if it was a girl or a boy. Believing the stepping man had something to do with it, the group set out to the graveyard. Before they got there, Kizuna used a telepathic link to warn them that they were being followed. The next moment, Olivia jumped out of a tree and attacked Nick, but he used the light body technique to avoid her. Seeing this, Olivia accused him of being the stepping man, but he told her to stop trying to gaslight him. Olivia then charged at him again, so he jumped out of the way, causing her to punch the iron fence. When he turned around, Kizuna activated Parallel, but she did the same thing and overpowered him. As they stood staring at her in shock, Nick suddenly recalled Leon's advice and called out her name. The crazy girl answered that she was the one and said she hadn't forgiven him for calling her the stepping man. Hearing this, they confirmed that they had misjudged her and listened to her side of the story. She told them that people called her the stepping man because she liked to walk on rooftops, and not because she was a kidnapper. The crew couldn't believe they had been wasting their time on a weirdo, and when Nick complained, Olivia ignored him. After she fixed the fence she bent, Kizuna threatened to expose her lies, and they started arguing. When they finally called a truce, she accompanied them to the graveyard to check the body. At first, nothing looked odd about it, but Olivia made them realize that what they were seeing wasn't real. They then moved the body and were surprised to find a small fragment of the Illusion King's jewel. As soon as Olivia destroyed it, the girl's face became more defined, and they saw that she had an old burn mark on her arm and a mole on her neck. When they checked her eyes, Zem confirmed that she had suffered from the Yellow Demon's sickness. When they returned to Red's place later, they confirmed the girl's identity from the missing persons reports. Zem insisted that they return her body to her parents and said they would avenge her because he figured out who the stepping man was. A few days later, Nick cornered the stepping man on a rooftop, and an intense fight commenced. During the fight, Nick said the stepping man's real name, and the illusion hiding his face was undone, just as Leon had said it would. Nalgava was impressed that Nick hadn't been bluffing when he said he knew who he was. So when he commended him, Nick explained that they had deduced he was kidnapping people and using them as research subjects for the yellow demon's sickness. Nalgava didn't try to deny it because everything Nick said was the truth, so he took a defensive stance. Nick then charged at him, and as Nagelvan defended himself against his punches, he suddenly leapt into the air, catching the old man off guard. When he came back down, he switched to heavy body, putting all his weight in his leg, so they fell into the old factory. Not surprisingly, they landed on their feet, and that was when Nalgava realized that he was surrounded. Zem then asked Nalgava why he had spread the disease, and he said it was because his daughter had died from it. Zem already knew that part since he'd investigated Nalgava, run a background check on him, and learned all he needed to know. The sickness was believed to be transmitted through plot making. However, Nalgava's daughter had contracted it through the blood of an infected person, and after she died, people spread rumors about her. Hurt by the rumors and lacking the will to live, he began researching the illness, hoping that his daughter's death wouldn't be in vain. Nick and the others told him that his reason didn't justify taking the lives of innocent people, but Nalgava said he didn't care because they were randos he picked off the street. Zem assured him that he was mistaken and reminded him of the girl whose body he put in the graveyard. He said the day he returned the girl's body to her parents, they cried and asked why their daughter had been taken away from them. Unfortunately, he couldn't give them a reasonable answer and had to leave them with so many questions. Zem then explained that because Nalgava didn't know where she came from, it didn't mean she wasn't someone. When he mentioned that the pain her family felt was the same pain Nalgava felt when his daughter died, Nalgava started feeling remorse. However, he said it didn't matter as the deed had already been done. Zem said they just wanted him to atone for his sins, but told him that stopping him wouldn't change anything. Before he could explain what he meant, Kizuna sensed someone coming and alerted everyone. The next moment, Nalgava was zapped, and when the door fell, a guy in full armor walked into the place. Nalgava asked why he'd come, and he told him it was to shut him up permanently. Zem tried to heal Nalgava, but the armor guy sent him flying with his magic and told him that he couldn't stop the inevitable. He also said that he was going to get rid of all of them, and the moment he attacked Tiana and Curran. However, instead of going to help them, Zem rushed to heal Nalgava, so the man called him an idiot. He said Zem always prioritized the wrong things and said what he thought was kindness was actually selfishness. Just then, Nick called out to Zem using the telepathic link and told him that they had to use Union. Zem didn't think he could do it, but Nick said it had to be him since he was the only one not seriously injured. When Zem failed to respond, the armored guy knocked Nick down, and Zem almost chose flight mode over fight mode. Fortunately, Kizuna called out to him at that moment and told him that Olivia would buy him time to figure out whether he wanted to be a hero or a coward. Zem then thanked Olivia, and the next second, she flew through a window and knocked the armored guy down. When he got back up, she addressed him as White Mask, and the guy demanded to know who she was. Olivia told him she was a professional multitasker who just happened to be passing by, so the guy charged at her. Surprisingly, she caught his blade between her hands and told him it was her turn. Before he could react, she moved behind him with the speed of light and sent him flying with a kick. However, she didn't give him time to recover and began attacking him repeatedly until cracks appeared on his helmet. The cracks covered up in a matter of seconds, confirming her suspicion that he was using a sacred sword. Since the guy was focused on her, Zem and Nick quickly merged using Union, and when he realized it, he became pissed. He demanded to know how they had gotten hold of the sacred sword, but the boys ignored his question. They had also figured out that he was using a sacred sword, so Kizuna told him it was time they went band for band. Intrigued, White Mask accepted the challenge, but he suddenly turned and trapped Olivia in a high-pressure barrier. Zem tried to go to her, but Kizuna told him not to, explaining that the moment he stepped into the barrier, he'd be crushed. The next moment, the White Mask attacked, so Zem used his hands as a shield to defend himself. The sword was surprisingly heavy, and it pushed him back, forcing him to dig his shoes in the ground so he could remain standing. When he finally freed himself, he began bouncing around the room like a runaway ping-pong ball. He was going so fast that his opponent couldn't pinpoint his exact location. The distraction weakened the barrier, so Olivia broke out of it and tried to attack him. White Mask easily evaded the attack and finally caught Zem. However, he failed to realize he'd been played until Kizuna came flying at his face. Unfortunately, that barely left a crack in his armor, but he commended them for their efforts. He then told them he would see them again and escaped after dropping a bomb on them. A few minutes later, the crew crawled out of the rubble, and poor Nalgava remained trapped. Curran immediately tried to go to him, but Tiana told her not to, and Zem explained that any sudden movements would send him to the afterlife. Nalgava said he didn't mind dying, and that was when Zem realized that he was infected with the yellow demon sickness. Since they couldn't save him, Zem healed Nalgava to reduce his pain. The next moment, the building began to fall apart, so Zem reluctantly said goodbye to Nalgava before leaving. Later, after everything had settled, the crew returned to the place, and Zem fell to his knees as he mourned Nalgava. When he finished, his friends consoled him and said they could rest easy now that the Stepping Man case had been solved. Olivia told them not to get too relaxed, because it was obvious that Nalgava was but a small piece of a large puzzle. She said the White Mask was still out there, and since he was using sacred weapons, it was clear that he had the backing of powerful people. Her statement made the group doubt who she truly was, so they asked questions. They also told her that if she planned to be part of them, she had to lay down all her cards, so she revealed that she was the Sacred Sword of War. Days after the incident, Nick and the others took some time off, but they were all so depressed that they spent their days in bed. One afternoon, while Nick was rummaging through his things, he found a broken sword and was reminded of his past. He had come to the city with his parents, but their wagon got attacked, and his mother hid him in the secret lair. Unfortunately, the people who attacked them unalived his parents and then tried to do the same to him. Nick managed to escape from the wagon, but before he could go far, he bumped into Argus. The man looked so angry that Nick thought he was going to hurt him, but the man surprised him by throwing his knife at the bandit chasing him. Once it dawned on him that he was out of danger, Nick hugged Argus, who wasn't just his savior, but an old friend of his parents. After that day, Argus took Nick in and trained him to become an adventurer. The first labyrinth he took him to was the Slime Labyrinth, and while they were there, Argus taught Nick that the most important lesson was never to let his guard down. Nick assumed he meant in the future, but at that moment, he slipped on some slime and fell, prompting Argus to laugh at him. Nick also joined in and promised to become a decent adventurer. Sometime later, Argus took him to a labyrinth with a real monster and gave him only a small sword to protect himself. When Nick tried to defend himself with it, the monster slashed it in half. Back in the present, Nick held the broken sword and started wondering what life would have been like if he were still with Argus or if his parents hadn't died. Eventually, he fell asleep, and when he woke up, it was raining. He could also hear Agate humming, so he looked out the window and was surprised to see her taking shelter from the rain there. Since he didn't want her to get wet, he lowered the umbrella she gave him when she invited him to her concert. Agate was surprised to see it, but to him, she was happy to learn that he wasn't a homeless bum. As they conversed further, Nick asked Agate if she wouldn't take the umbrella from him, and she told him to work out his muscles for a little while longer. Meanwhile, Zem was in Nalgava's clinic tending to a patient. When he finished his examination, the guy asked if he'd unalived Nalgava. Zem confirmed that he was, and the guy suddenly started celebrating, saying he won a bet. Apparently, different accounts of what happened to Nalgava were going around the slums, and the guy bet that Zem had murdered the old doctor to take his place. After the guy left, an old man showed up, and while tending to him, Zem told himself that, despite the wrong things Nalgava had done, he still helped people. Zem took over his clinic because he knew the people needed him, and he was happy that he listened to his conscience. The next day, Tiana went to the racetrack to place bets, and even though she won, she didn't feel happy. In fact, she hadn't felt anything for a while and had just been doing things because they were things she was used to. Bored, she went to buy some soup and, while eating it, wondered if Curran would like it. Later that week, all the survivors' party members met at the guild, but things between them were awkward. Curran tried to make small talk, but it only made things worse. As Kizuna observed them, he noticed that Zem's clothes were covered in mud, so he asked if he was still going to the slums. Zem told him not to be nosy, but Kizuna didn't know how to do that, so that night, he went to the clinic. When Zem realized it, he complained, but Kizuna claimed that he was just there to act as his bodyguard because the place wasn't safe. Zem decided not to argue with him, so Kizuna took his spot on the window. The next day, when the members met again, the awkwardness remained, so Curran excused herself, saying she was going to get some food. As she walked around town, her thoughts went to Kalios, and she swore never to forgive him for his betrayal. Her thoughts were soon interrupted when she noticed the merchant who had tried to con her attempting to do the same with a young tiger girl. When she exposed his lies, the man couldn't say a word, and the girl quietly slipped away. Shortly after that, she noticed her friends and asked whether they had been following her. They explained that they were on their way to a festival and asked if she wanted to join them. Curran said she was in as long as there was food, and as they walked there, Olivia ran towards them, throwing flyers everywhere. Confused, they asked if she was being chased, and Olivia said she brought news. However, instead of telling them what it was, she tried to create some suspense, so Tiana read the flyers she brought. Apparently, the legendary dark demon god was on the verge of being revived, but they refused to believe it because Olivia was the one who wrote the article. Olivia swore that her source was legit, but they still didn't believe it and said it wasn't the first time she published unverified news. Still, Olivia denied the allegations, saying there was no smoke without fire, so the rumors had to have some truth to them. When she mentioned the white mask and his connection to the black market, Curran's interest piqued. She asked if it was possible to find out about the Dragon King's jewel that Callio stole from her. Her friends didn't know how to respond because they knew it was a touchy subject, but Curran continued speaking. She told them she felt like she'd been avoiding her problems and wanted to rectify that. Tiana advised her to go for it, reminding her that she wasn't alone and that they would be with her. Curran didn't immediately jump at the idea, but Nick assured her that he didn't mind as long as it was what she wanted. Olivia then suggested that they follow the trail of bad guys until they discovered who the big boss was. Everyone except Nick seemed to like the idea because Bro couldn't remember signing up for the Justice League, but in the end, he had no choice but to agree. While they were striking a dramatic pose, the festival fireworks went off, so they turned to admire them. Later, Kizuna asked Olivia what she thought of Nick and the others, and she told him that, just like Aang, they had a lot to learn before they were ready to save the world. What do you think is the deal with the White Mask? Is he really involved in some grand evil scheme? If you got this far, comment pineapple pen to confuse the comment readers. Also, why don't you check out this video right here?